In this video, we are going to talk about some of our knitting notions. Now that's basically meaning all these little things that you see here that accompany your knitting needles and your knitting project. I'm going to start off with scissors. It is always nice to have a pair of scissors, preferably a pair of nice sharp scissors for trimming your ends, cutting your yarn. These I found at a discount store and they are very nice. I'm not entirely sure what brand they are, but they were quite costly. I think it was $20 original price, and I may have paid $4 for them. But a very nice pair of scissors, a good pair of scissors is handy for cutting your yarn. Dull scissors makes life miserable, so make sure they're sharp. Another cutting implement that you might see around is this cutting medallion. And this I got at Joann's. I think Hobby Lobby may have this as well. But if you can see, in between these arms, there is a blade in this medallion. And you would just slip your yarn in between. Allow me to demonstrate. So here's your yarn. You would simply slip it in between the arms of the medallion and pull, and that cuts. So this might be convenient for traveling, if you're traveling with your knitting or going somewhere where your scissors may not be allowed, or some people may just prefer this. It has a hole on the end here that you can stick a string through or put on a keychain and attach to a little notions bag. Next, I'm going to show you darning needles. And in my video, How to Sew in Your Ends, I show you darning needles that I keep in a tube. You can get a set of darning needles in a tube like this at Joann's or Hobby Lobby. And the top just screws off and you dump out a few darning needles. And as you can see, there are various sizes. We have this super tiny one right here, a medium-sized darning needle, and quite a large darning needle. I would say I do prefer my metal darning needles, and I don't know if you can see it, but this one has been used quite a bit. Poor thing is a little bent and wonky, but still good and useful. And having a little container like this for your darning needles helps you keep track of your tiny objects a little easier. You also have your plastic darning needles, and this is something I believe you can get at Walmart, Joann's, or Hobby Lobby. And you notice I don't mention Michael's. I do not have a Michael's close enough to me to justify frequent visits, so I really don't know all that they might carry, but I'm sure that they would have darning needles as well. I'm not a huge fan of the plastic ones. I tend to break them. So you could see by my warped darning needle, sometimes I get a little bit aggressive. But some people may prefer the plastic ones, and this giant one is very good for thicker yarn projects. You also have these strange darning needles here. I believe these are called a shuttle darning needle, and some people prefer them. I got them because I heard other YouTubers raving about how wonderful they are and how easy it is to thread them. And as you can see, it is quite easy to thread them. Just easily poke your yarn through, and there it is threaded, and you would weave this through your project like a normal darning needle. I don't particularly care for these, but it is very much an individual personal taste what type of darning needle you prefer. Next on our list of notions is a tape measure. This is very handy, and you can get them very cute, like this little guy. You can get them plain or more plain. But you pull out your tape measure and you push the button to retract. This is very handy for measuring how many stitches you have in an inch, which if you get into reading patterns, they will have a section at the beginning of the pattern called a gauge. And what that means is how many stitches you have in 1 inch or in 4 inches of your knitting. And basically pattern writers and knitters use that to determine how big a knitted item is going to be. It's used to determine size in sweaters and hats, and you can easily adjust or measure or create your own pattern if you know how many stitches you have in an inch. And that's gauge is also important if you're following a pattern, because they will tell you how many yards or how many meters of yarn it takes to knit that pattern, but only if you're matching the gauge that they have. If you knit tighter and you get more stitches an inch, then you can go up a needle size until you get to the appropriate gauge. Or if you knit less stitches per inch, you can go down a needle size. Or if you're like me and you like the knitted fabric that your more stitches per inch creates, then you can look at how many stitches around your pattern is and determine what size sweater or blanket you're going to knit. And I can go more into that at a later video. But measuring tape, very handy for your washcloth. You may not necessarily need this, just eyeballing it, but my little panda tape measure is always at hand to tell me how long something is. Next, we're going to go over this strange little eraser looking cone. What this is a needle stopper, and you put it on the end of your knitting needle, and it keeps your needle from poking through the bag that you might have your project in, or your stitches from coming off the end of the needle. So that can be handy, and they come in pairs, one for each needle. You can also find where it's just one stopper with 2 holes. But it can be very convenient to have with you. Maybe not essential, but very convenient. Next on our list of notions is going to be stitch markers. You can see down here I have a lot of different kinds of stitch markers. You have stitch markers like this, and these are closed. And what you do with your stitch markers is when you're knitting along and you have a certain number of stitches on your knitting needle, which when you get into certain types of patterns like cables or lace, stitch markers can be handy to mark your pattern repeats or special sections in the pattern. If you're knitting in the round on circular knitting needles, like if you're knitting a hat or a sock, stitch markers are very good to mark where the beginning of your circle is. And your closed stitch markers, they do not come off, so you have to be careful not to knit them into your work. Next, we have a stitch marker like this spiral stitch marker that it is open on one end. So you can put it on and you can be knitting along, and it will come off your cable if you need it to, or if you accidentally knit it into your work, which I have done, you can just slip it right off. We have these spring type stitch markers that are the same. They are not closed, they are removable, and you see that you can separate the edges there and slip it. If you knit it into your work, you can easily slip it off of the yarn or even off of your circular needle cable. And these are my all-time favorite stitch marker. These are handy for everything. I have actually used them in non-knitting projects, but as you can see, it's like a safety pin. It goes by a couple of names. It's called a coilless safety pin or coilless locking stitch marker. I've also heard it referred to as a light bulb stitch marker or light bulb safety pin. So you can see it resembles a light bulb. This would be my absolute favorite. I cannot say enough good things about these. And you can get this at Walmart, Hobby Lobby, Joann, Amazon. They are fairly cheap. I have an entire container full of them. Many of them are being used in projects. But one thing that you can use stitch markers for is if you are counting rows in your knitting, and I will grab something to demonstrate. So I have my knitting project here, and my instructions and my pattern tell me to knit so many rows before changing and doing something different. What I can do is use this light bulb stitch marker and put it around a stitch, lock it in, and then I'm able to count however many stitches to my next change or whatever I am doing. So very convenient, absolutely love these. Next on my list of notions is a needle gauge. Not exactly essential for starting out, but something I actually got this for free when I ordered some yarn, so that is probably the only reason I have a needle gauge, but I have found it to be rather convenient. Like when my sizing rubs off my laminated birch needles, you can just simply stick this needle gauge, your needle, into the gauge, and you're like, oh, well, now I know. It is a size 8, US size 8, or a 5mm needle, and that is the size I need for my project. Yay! And lastly, on my list, this might be considered more of a fun convenience and not completely necessary. This is a progress keeper. When I am knitting, say, sweaters, and I'm decreasing the number of my stitches to make my sleeve start narrowing towards the wrist, I have to count stitches, I have to count rows so that I know how many rows to my next decrease. I can use this and put on my stitches like I showed you earlier, or I can use this fun little guy, which sometimes just, you need a smile and lock his little lobster claw clasp around my stitches, and he just hangs out there staring at me until I get to my next set of decreases in my sleeve. So, not necessary that you have something super cute like this, but it can definitely make you smile when you need a smile. Hello! So many rows to your next decrease. So that is it for the notions video. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them below in the comments, and I will try to get back to you. Bye, y'all.